Oh boy. With spoilers and all, let's not wait any longer. Day 2 of Seattle. Ellie and Dina make further discovery on what's going on in Seattle. Safe to say Seattle is officially a hellhole. In this universe anyway. No disrespect to anybody who lives in Seattle. I've never been there. I can't say what it's like in real life. But in the Last of Us universe, it's messed up. That's putting it lightly. Dina and Ellie are planning their next move to find Abby and her crew. Listening to the radio and triangulating their positions throughout the city, she's able to figure out where Nora is hiding, and Nora was one of the people that was with Abby and was holding Ellie down while Abby killed Joel. Dina determines that the WLF are very overconfident since they know that the Seraphites don't use modern technology to communicate. Therefore, anybody could listen in on what they're talking about. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't getting a little impatient with this season, because I wanted to see at least some flashbacks that we saw in the previews and what we saw in Last of Us Part 2 involving Joel and Ellie and how things led to where they were at the beginning of the season. Thankfully, they are following up on their promises with the ending scene of this episode. I kind of wish that we saw that last week, but if they are going to dedicate a whole episode similar to episode 7 of last season, okay, that's perfectly fine. I still think it could have been 8 episodes, but nonetheless, because it does look like we are building towards the moment. If you played the games, you know what I'm talking about. But for anyone who's not in the know, you know that somewhere down the line, Ellie and Abby are going to confront each other. And we are kind of getting to that point. But then certain things happen and, well, I'll save the rest for another time. Day 2 is a crucial point in the events of Last of Us Part 2. If you played it, you know how this goes. Ellie is making her way towards the hospital to find Nora, while Dina stays behind keeping an eye on their hideout, listening to the radio transmissions throughout Seattle. Jesse finds Ellie and then helps her make their way back to their hideout. He does find the two of them in this situation, but it does play out differently. Dina is almost nearly incapacitated in the game as opposed to here. With Dina being there at the time when Joel was killed by Abby, she obviously has a strong reason to get her revenge. And Dina talks about how this raider broke into her house when she was 8 years old, killing her mom and her sister. And with a string of luck, she's able to pick up a gun, startling the raider and shooting him dead. It's not only the connection she had with Joel, Dina, she knows Ellie's pain, because she went through it herself. But to rewind to the beginning of this episode, we see a meeting with a high-ranking official of the WLF, the one that Isaac meets in the flashback when he defies Fedra. She talks to this Sergeant Park of the WLF and learns from her not only is the cordyceps growing in the basement of the hospital, it's also in the air. Given that this was the ground zero of the outbreak in Seattle, and they didn't really attend to it in the years since then, it's a realistic outcome of what happens when you leave something unattended for many years. And this brings the spores into the TV show since they were a big component in the games. Park talks about how she was having some people go down to the basement to investigate, and then over the radio she realizes that this guy couldn't breathe because he was breathing in the spores. And without hesitation, she cuts off all access to the basement. One of them, unfortunately, was her own son, and as much as it hurt her to do so, she did it for the greater good of the WLF. Basically the opposite of Joel's decision to save Ellie. But with Ellie and Dina in the middle of the night, they sneak into this area that's occupied by the WLF, and then they go into this remote area where all these power generators are at, and they discover a stalker lurking around in the dark. Ellie tells Dina the game plan since she fought one of these things back in Jackson, 2 against 1 or better odds. But that goes south pretty quickly because not only is there 1, 2, 3, but 7 of them. While at work this morning, I was listening to the Last of Us podcast. The effect that they use on the stalkers when they're in the dark and they shine their lights on them, there's a little flare that shows up in their eyeballs. It's kind of like a dog in the middle of the night because you can see their eyes reflecting off of certain lights in the distance. And I guess some ghosts or specters would have that effect in certain horror movies or anything involving the supernatural, but it gives off that eerie and scary feeling that the infected would be able to exhibit. Runners and clickers are scary enough, including a bloater, but stalkers, I would say they are the worst kind of infected. And the roles kind of reverse between Ellie and Dina. Up until this point, Dina's the one usually laying out the game plan, but with Ellie being immune, she tells Dina to take cover so she can sacrifice herself by getting ripped apart. But the one stalker that jumps on top of the cage starts ripping the barriers off, so Ellie and Dina are basically screwed. I have to say, this whole sequence building up to the reveal of the stalkers, once again, flashbacks to playing both games for the first time, not knowing what was in certain rooms, my anxiety was through the stratosphere. And even though we saw it in the preview last week for this episode, seeing all those stalkers waiting for the attack, yeah, that's more or less how I reacted. But just when all hope might be lost, somebody comes to their rescue, and Ellie has a moment where she starts to think it might be Joel. With all the fear that she has of being killed, and the gunshots causing her ears to ring, and she can't really see the silhouette, she starts to think that it might be Joel. It turns out, it's Jesse. And he tells the two of them that he and Tommy snuck out of Jackson to go find them, and bring them back home. Jesse at this point has been very patient with Ellie, telling her how to fight properly, how to argue her case with the council, but in this case, risking her own life on her own, along with Dina, who he still has feelings for, it's not too surprising that he would be upset with her over this. And while love triangles in fiction can be obnoxious, this one is actually more subtle, but not so much. And when I say subtle, I'm not talking about how it's barely addressed. I'm talking about how it's downplayed to the point where there's enough there to see the tension between all three, but there's enough tension to show you that it's still there without weighing the plot down and tuning out everything else. Ellie and Dina do love each other, but Dina does still have some sort of feelings for Jesse since they spend enough time together to have some type of deep connection. Even if and when you meet someone who is able to help you heal, the feelings that you had for a previous person don't go away completely. I can tell you that for a fact. So they take off into this one park where the WLF track them, but they refuse to follow them in. And as soon as I saw the gate sign and the way the trees looked, I knew exactly what was coming. Seraphite territory. Before the scene, we saw hints of what the Seraphites were like and how dedicated they were to their cause, but this scene does not hold back. A wolf is being lynched by the Seraphites, and the leader of this one group uses a knife. I apologize if this is too graphic to anybody who's watching. He disembowels this guy.
I think I'm gonna be sick.
No joke. I literally started coughing and gagging. I literally thought that I was going to run to my bathroom and start vomiting. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. One thing that Druckmann and Mazin pointed out in the recent podcast episode, love is one of the biggest themes in The Last of Us, but they pointed out that faith is very similar to that. It's not inherently good or bad. When you put it in the hands of the right people, you can see the positive side of it all. But when you put it in the wrong hands, then you see a more unhinged and scarier version of it. Religions throughout history have been able to show this with the Crusades, witch hunts, all the atrocities committed by Muslim extremists, including 9/11, and you can probably find a few examples of extreme Judaism. It's not just those three faith-based groups. Other religions and other cults, if they're put into the wrong hands, they can go too far in a few places. Our country's kind of being ruled by a cult right now. So we're already seeing the consequences of their leadership. Up until now, I was wondering how Dina was going to get taken out of the equation. Earlier when they were going through that abandoned area before they ran into the stalkers, I was afraid they were going to start going through the basement where all the spores were flying around, putting Dina at risk and therefore infecting her. But here she gets shot in the leg by an arrow from one of the Seraphites. In the game it plays out differently because Dina's still at the hideout while Ellie gets hit in the shoulder from an arrow because she doesn't see the Seraphites coming. But we don't really see Ellie ripping through all these Seraphites like we do in the game. I mean, I was kind of waiting for her to do something like that to one of them at least, but given that this is not a video game, so you don't really have the license to go into all bones of action type of territory, she ends up luring them away from Jesse and Dina so she can go off on her own to find Nora. Everything from all the kinds of whistles they use to communicate and the torches in the forest as they're looking through certain areas, the eeriness involving the scars just makes me shudder with fear. Out of all the groups we've seen in The Last of Us, both show and games, these guys I want to stay as far away from as possible. But then Ellie makes her way to the hospital and sneaks past his one guard and his dog, who senses her nearby, sneaking through the grass, but she manages to get away without killing the dog. And that's the thing that happens in the game. A dog will pick up on your scent. In order to distract them away, you can either throw a brick or a bottle to get them off your trail. As the dog sensed Ellie nearby and started barking like crazy, I thought, don't you dare. Don't you dare. Don't ever. Don't even think about hurting that poor dog. This sounds cruel, but all the humans can die, but dogs are a no-no. This is a hospital where the WLF soldiers go to get attended to medically. From what we gather in both show and games, it's a very crucial area to hold on to. Given that the infection is growing in the basement, I think it's understandable as to why they're evacuating, because they don't want to take a chance of it going up into the upper levels. Nora's attending to the wounded and getting more supplies, then Ellie sneaks in and puts her into a corner. She recognizes Ellie from Jackson and says something that's actually kind of empathetic, but then throws a curveball right in her face.
You, the little bitch, got what he deserved.
I know what I said in my review of episode 2 of this season, that Joel did in a way have it coming to him. I still stand by that. However, on a personal note, no, he actually didn't deserve it. So it's sort of a conflicting opinion, if you know what I mean. I actually had a visceral reaction somewhat, both in the game and in the show, when Nora says that he got what he deserved. I felt what Ellie felt in that moment. Now, Nora is a former Firefly. She was part of the Salt Lake crew that Joel wiped out most of, so she harbors a lot of hatred towards Joel for killing their one only chance of survival of the human race. Even though I don't think it was really a guarantee that it was gonna work, it's understandable why Nora feels the way she feels. She says this to Ellie in the basement, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. They end up in the basement, and then Ellie finds a very scary and eerie sight of the cordyceps growing and all these things going into the air. The spores. And two bodies that we see. One of them is Sergeant Park's kid, and the other is a doctor who's been down there for over 20 years, among the first healthcare workers to attend to the first people who were infected. I think it was Craig Mazin or Neil Druckmann that pointed this out, but it was almost a symbiotic relationship that these bodies have with the cordyceps down here in order to fight tooth and nail for survival.
And sometimes these things in nature, when they bind, they can be hard to unbind.
And the show, I think, is indicating that the cordyceps is slowly evolving, with the stalkers being more intelligent and the big hive minds that Jackson encountered with the big battle. Nature is cruel, and it always finds a way.
Life, finds a way.
Of course, with Ellie being immune, she's never encountered spores before, but we all know that she's going to be okay, because she can breathe in spores to take down a dozen men. Nothing. And I know some people probably would prefer the old way in the game where she used the spores to show Dina her immunity, but since the series I think had to create some more drama and tension between the two before they finally were able to consummate their relationship for all intents and purposes, I'm perfectly fine with it, and personally on my end, I know some people will feel differently. I think it's important to stay true to the source material, but I'm also open to new stuff if I think they can do it right. But then she finds Nora by the doors, coughing up pretty badly, and she sees that Ellie's not affected by this, and then realizes that she's the immune girl that they were about to cure before Joel came in and stopped them. This is basically like when you're taught something about religion, like Christianity for instance. You're taught something about Jesus and you think, okay, yeah, he was this person and he was that person and he may or may not have been the actual prophet. But if you were to actually see him with your own eyes and see the things that he was able to do, Nora's reaction is, I think, how many Christians or many people who aren't necessarily lined up with Christian values, they would probably react in a similar way. But we also learned something that we, the audience, have been wondering for several episodes. Nora reveals to Ellie that Joel killed the one doctor, Abby's father, who was going to be able to extract a cure from her. Ellie reveals that she knows, and that she doesn't care. I mean, obviously, as a fan of the games, I knew, but a lot of other people who aren't familiar with the source material, they didn't. And Ellie does something that I was kind of hoping that they would show. Ellie has a violent heart, according to David from season 1. And now we're starting to see that monster come out, picking up that pipe just like she does in the game, but hits Nora in the leg, just like Abby did to Joel with the golf club, more or less giving that crew a taste of their own medicine. And if this episode couldn't add any more insult to injury, it has to end with an image of Ellie waking up in bed to Joel standing in the doorway saying good morning.
Hey, kiddo.
Hi.
And then with the credits, we hear Present Tense by Pearl Jam, hence the shirt that I'm wearing right now. Which means next week's episode is the equivalent of episode 7 of season 1, where we see the flashback to Ellie and Riley. Now we're going to see all those flashbacks from Ellie's perspective and how she figured out that Joel lied to her. Now for anyone who's not familiar with the game, I won't give it away, but for all of us who have played it, yeah, we know what's coming. Now, I am curious to see how they interpret it in this medium. Are they going to show all 3 flashbacks? Or maybe just blend them all together? Or maybe just 2 of them? I guess we'll find out. Yeah, everything in this episode, from the stalkers, the Seraphites, the wolves, Nora getting infected, Ellie knowing the truth. I don't know if I would say this is the best episode of the season, but it's really, really close. Really, really close to episode 2. Oh my god, I forgot to mention something. With the emergency power on when Ellie finds Nora, and we hear this sound effect in the background. There's something else down in that basement. Yeah, put a cap on it, we're moving on.
If I ever were to lose you,
So that's all I got for you guys on episode 5. Thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this episode if you've seen it. I'll see you guys in the next one, and as always, endure and survive.